I'm Diane Kresh, Director of Arlington Public Library and host of Arlington Reads 2021. Sponsored by the Friends of the Arlington Public Library, Arlington Reads brings authors and leading influencers to our community to speak about literature and the important issues of our time. Our theme this year is Food for Thought, offering perspectives on a range of political, cultural, social, and global issues, from climate change and concerns about threats against democracy, to hashtag Black Lives Matter and hashtag Me Too. June is Pride Month, and an excellent time to recognize and celebrate the achievements of members of the LGBTQ+ community. This evening, we have the pleasure of talking with Jeb, also known as Joan E. Byron, whose groundbreaking book of photographs, Eye to Eye, Portraits of Lesbians, was self-published in 1979. An internationally recognized documentary artist and activist, Jeb began to chronicle the lives of LGBTQ+ people in 1971. Recently reprinted in a sumptuous edition by Anthology Editions, it has new texts by photographer Lola Flash, former professional soccer player Lori Lindsay, author, editor, and historian Joan Nessel, and the late activist T.A. Corinne. Eye to Eye is a celebration of lesbians at work, at play, and at home. It provides a lens into the lives of lesbians enjoying the kinds of activities everyone enjoys: playing softball and swimming, being silly with our children, going to the beach, cooking, surrounded by families, friends, lovers, and partners. Eye to Eye is in the collection of Arlington Public Library, and we encourage you to check it out. Before we welcome Jeb, here are a few words from Elle Simmons, representing our event co-sponsor, Outstanding, an Arlington County employee resource group for LGBTQ+ staff and allies. Welcome, Elle.
My name is Elle Simmons, and I'm part of the leadership team for Outstanding, Arlington County Government's employee resource group for LGBTQIA+ employees and their allies. Our theme for this year's Pride Month is Rainbows Across the Generations, perspectives on LGBTQIA+ experiences. So we are especially excited to be partnering with Arlington Public Library on this Arlington Reads event. In a time where queer representation in all forms of media is on the rise, I think it is even more important to recognize the groundbreaking accomplishments of works like Jeb's Eye to Eye, Portraits of Lesbians that put us on the path we walk today. Thank you for joining me and my fellow Outstanding members in working to create an environment and culture that is inclusive and affirming of the LGBTQIA+ community in Arlington and around the world. And now, introducing photographer and activist Joan E. Byron, Jeb.
Welcome, Jeb, to Arlington Reads. We're delighted to have this conversation with you this evening. This is Pride Month, and we have a lot to talk about. But before we start the interview, how has the pandemic been treating you?
Well, first of all, I want to say hello from traditional homeland of the Piscataway. And as you know, Diane, I am your neighbor in Maryland, so not very far away. And I have been very fortunate throughout the pandemic, which has been so devastating to so many people, and especially, you know, more marginalized people. And, you know, I'm hopeful that we will not forget them now that the vaccine has come, and that we will continue to try to help people who were hurt so badly. Personally, I'm so fortunate because I live in a very close, multi-generational community. We're all in like 3 blocks of each other, and we take care of each other, and all got through very well. And I kept busy during the pandemic working on the book, Eye to Eye Portraits of Lesbians, which I think we're going to talk about today. Yes, and since I'm somebody who likes to work, and it kept me busy, and I really enjoyed working with the team at Anthology Editions, which was my and is my publisher. And I could not be more happy with the resulting book. So it was an easy pandemic for me.
Oh, that's good to hear. My wife and I had a very small pod of people that we were close with. And so it was both a source of comfort and safety, but also it was limited. So I didn't feel that we were ever exposed to anything. So we got through it, knock on wood, and now we're all vaccinated, and a new day seems possible. And the library is slowly reopening, which is really important to all of us. Speaking of people who are often disadvantaged and don't have the resources they need, it was really tough, even in a community like Arlington, to have the libraries closed. So we're delighted you're here, and we are going to talk about Eye to Eye. Before we do that, I'd like to begin at the beginning, because you were born and raised in Washington, D.C. Is that correct?
Native Washingtonian through and through.
Okay. And you found your way to Mount Holyoke, one of the Seven Sisters School, a women's college. My wife went to Holyoke.
Another uncommon woman.
Right. Absolutely. So tell me about Holyoke and how that maybe reinforced or maybe even helped form some of your ideas about how you wanted to be in the world.
Well, the most important thing to say about Mount Holyoke is that it is the place I came out as a lesbian I knew I was a lesbian from a very early age, but I did not have a lover until I was at Mount Holyoke. And when, and we had to stay in the closet because this was the 60s. So way, before Stonewall in the 60s. So living in the closet is not fun. And I tried to come out to my college psychiatrist at Mount Holyoke, and he assured me it was a phase and not to worry about it. And, I have to thank Mount Holyoke just for being a women's college at a time when I wanted to be just among women. And I got a very good education there, but it was not the lesbian-friendly place then that, thank goodness, it became later.
Sure. So you were already an activist and through activism discovered photography, or how did those two interests begin to merge?
I became an activist very early on. And in fact, I was rejected by another fancy Seven Sisters College because they did not want an activist. And it was clear from my recommendations who they would be getting. But the way that my activism turned into photography was in the early 1970s when I was a member of a radical lesbian separatist feminist collective called the Furies in Washington, D.C. And in the Furies, we were reinventing everything. And I had to reinvent myself because the privileged education that I had, I went from Mount Holyoke to Oxford University in England. And it was shortly after I came back from Oxford that I became part of the Furies Collective. And they did not appreciate the way that I argued and how fluent I was with words and how convincing I could be. So we all agreed that the patriarchy had polluted my way of communicating because of this privileged education. We called it prick in the head. And that was kind of a shorthand way of saying my mind had been colonized. And I think now we talk about that often in a similar but new way. But in any case, because of my privileged patriarchal education, I needed to find another way to communicate. And since my artistic skills were extremely limited, I chose to teach myself photography, and I fell in love with it. And that has made my life wonderful.
I think I read that maybe you took a correspondence course in photography, which I remember the correspondence courses from on the back of a matchbook, you know.
That's it.
Blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
I taught myself two ways. One was a correspondence course, which of course nobody these days knows what that is, but it meant that in the snail mail, they would send you lessons and things that you know, assignments to do, and then you would mail them back, and then, you know, the mail would go back and forth. But the other thing I did was I got a job in a camera store, and this was a mom and pop camera store. So it had a big divide down the middle. It was actually a physical divide. And on one side was the mom who did the retail of the photo finishing. You would bring your film in and, you know, it would get developed. On the other side was the pop who sold the cameras and the other equipment. And I actually almost caused a divorce by insisting that I eventually, after doing my time on the photo finishing side, be allowed to work on the equipment side. So pushing the feminist agenda.
Well, that's terrific. So the book, where did the idea for doing the book come from? And how did you start the project, which I guess took a number of years?
Well, it came out of necessity because I could not find images of lesbians that looked anything like me or any other lesbian I knew. Everything was from the point of view of, you know, white men. Mm-hmm. And men of means usually. So I just needed to see a picture mm-hmm. of lesbians kissing. So I borrowed camera because I did not even have a camera at that point. And I held it out. I kissed my lover at the time, Sharon, and I made not only the first lesbian picture, but maybe one of the earliest selfies ever. And I went on from there to make images I could share with other people, because this hunger to be affirmed and reflected in an authentic way was very clear to me and very widespread in the community. So I just started trying to make images of as wide-ranging number of lesbians as I could. And that meant I had to go way out of my own comfort zone and friendship circle. And I traveled around the country. And when I thought I had a fair number of images, you know, that would represent us, I tried to get the book published, but none of the existing lesbian or gay presses would publish it because I wanted it to be on paper where you could actually see something of the quality of the photographs. Because during this whole number of years when I was gathering images for the book, I was also publishing images all over the nation in newspapers and magazines, but those publications were on newsprint, and photographs on newsprint better than nothing. Right. But I was determined that they should, you know, that if this was going to be the first book of out lesbians by a lesbian, that it should look as good as possible. Mm-hmm. So I raised the money myself through sort of a precursor of Kickstarter, I guess, you know, among friends and family. And I got loans mostly, which I paid back except for one very generous donor. And I published it myself, and now we have it reissued over 40 years later.
Right. And I have a copy. The library has a copy. It's just an absolutely gorgeous, gorgeous book. And we can hold up our copies.
And they can kiss. There you go.
There you go. But I imagine, so this is the 70s. It's pre-internet.
Yeah.
So it's pre cell phones and GPS and easy ways to get around. And I imagine you kind of getting into a car, something like Frances McNormand in Nomad, and just sort of setting out. But how did you know where to go, and what was intriguing to you about subjects, and where you wanted to photograph lesbians kind of in their natural environment?
It was all word of mouth. Mm-hmm. And I would say, I would identify something that I knew was missing in my work. Like, say, I knew I didn't have any rural lesbians because I lived in a city. So I would put out the word that I was looking for rural lesbians, and people would say, well, I don't know somebody, but I know somebody who knows somebody. And eventually I would get to a person. Then we had to have a conversation about what the book was, what it would mean for somebody, you know, to be in the book. And, you know, the women who agreed to be photographed for this book, putting their real faces and their real names, in some cases just their first names, but still names,
right,
were so brave and so courageous. And there would be no book without them being willing to take what were real risks at the time, when people were losing their custody of their children, they were losing their jobs, they were being shunned by their families, they were being thrown out of their housing, all of which was legal with no recourse. Mm-hmm. So we owe all a great debt to these women who were willing to, and many of them who did not know me, right? Mm-hmm. Because it was word of mouth. And I had to introduce myself and be very candid with them from the outset about what I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. With, you know, their photograph.
And so did you spend time with them, getting to know them a little bit so that the trust could develop, and then the photographs could be sort of more natural? Was that the work process that you used?
As much as possible, I would spend time with them without a camera. in the first instance. Sometimes there was very little time because of the traveling. Sometimes it was much easier, but in all the situations, I let them choose, you know, where they wanted to be photographed, how they wanted to be photographed. And I think that added to it looking, you know, less like something I had staged. As,
right.
Yeah,
Right.
because I didn't, you know, I wanted it to be as real as possible.
Well, and they certainly come across
Yeah.
like that. Like these are, it's like a family album, if you will, of people in very routine kinds of, you know, they're sitting together, they're playing with their children, they're swimming, they're playing softball, they're working under the hood of a truck. I mean, it's quite a range. But I was curious, was there any one story that maybe stuck out with you? Like you're taking the photographs, but you're also getting to know these folks. And was there a story that really resonated with you that you and that you felt, oh yeah, I got it. I captured that essence of that person or that couple?
Well, first of all, I'm going to challenge you on language, which I think will be okay with you since you're a librarian.
Yes.
I'm very sensitive to the language that I use because photography, you know, historically being a male thing, has very predatory language where the photographer, you know, loads the camera and goes out armed in order to aim it and capture the image to take it home. And the person in the image is the subject, and the whole feeling of being dominated, you know, by the photographer is so strong that I never say take a photograph. I always say make a photograph, because my way of doing it is so collaborative. And I think the way you talk about something affects the way you think about it. So I like to approach it in that collaborative mindset. And to answer the original question, I'm not going to single anybody out because they were all amazing, amazingly wonderful, courageous, and beautiful people. And one of the things I did talk about when I talked with potential collaborators was why I wanted them, what it was about them that I found beautiful and worth sharing with other lesbians.
Okay, well, that gets at what I was trying inartfully to express.
No.
Well, you know, you're establishing an intimate relationship. You're telling stories. You're working collaboratively with a number of people, many of whom you didn't know. So there's a trust that has to be developed. And I again, looking at it as I did for the first time when I purchased the reissue, I was just struck by how both intimate as well as everyday, kind of ordinary the activities were and the relationships. And that itself must have been kind of a groundbreaking thing, that you're presenting people as everyone is presented. Like they're not any more special because they're this or that, but we're just people.
Well, one of the early reviewers for the first edition wrote something like, you know, the women are doing ordinary things and seem perfectly comfortable, and the photographer was comfortable, but it's shocking. It's shocking to look at. You know, it was really considered quite revolutionary at the time.
Right. Well,
because it was ordinary, but it had the word lesbian right on the front of the book.
Sure. But again, going back to your mission, if you will, and your purpose, you wanted to find other people living life as you were. and creating that sense of community. But I was struck also by some of the legal challenges that you faced when you were trying to publish the book. And you mentioned Nan Hunter, who
Yes.
is a very prominent attorney in LGBTQ plus issues at Georgetown, I believe. And so can you talk a little bit about some of the legal challenges that you faced in self-publishing and how you address them?
Well, of course, I had people sign a release form when I photographed them, and it was a release form that I made up myself that said I could identify them as lesbians and use their names and so on. And when I could not find a lesbian or gay press willing to publish the book, and I decided to self-publish it, I then had to find a printer, a press that would print the book. And that turned out to be more difficult than you might think, but I did find a press in Baltimore, so I could commute there. And they wanted me to go back and get a whole new round of releases from everybody. So when I did that, it scared some people off, and I lost some of the people in the book. And, you know, I understand that. As I say, it was nothing to, you know, to take those risks. Anybody who didn't want to, I totally got it. Mm-hmm. So then brought the second batch of releases in, and the press said, well, you know, under the laws of Maryland, the printing press itself can be sued for libel. Oh. And what it amounted to was they could not believe that any person in their right mind would agree to be publicly identified as a lesbian. And they were sure they would be sued. So I had to get Nan, who was a baby lawyer at the time, right, just out of law school, but brilliant from the beginning as she is now, to draw up some kind of document. I can't remember exactly what it said, but it protected the press from any suits, any lawsuits. And they were convinced by this document that Nan made up that it was safe for them to print the book. And then it turns out that one of the pressmen refused to work on it because he had religious objections to what was going on. So also, because I had raised the money myself, there was not enough money to get, you know, press proofs. Oh. So I had to like live at the press and watch the sheets come off the press, so that if there was any problem, I could stop the press right away. You know, usually they send it to you and you get to look at it and tell them. Anyway, so the printing turned out to be pretty arduous.
Yeah, wow. I mean, to have that kind of commitment, you know, a labor of love, to be able to, with each hurdle, okay, well, we'll get across this one, we'll get across this one. Yeah. So when it was finally published, what was the run of the printing like, and what was the response?
We printed 5,000 copies, and it sold out in 3 months, and it went to the top of the LGBTQ bookstore bestseller list. The hunger in the community for the images that were like the ones in, you know, I mean, it was a huge success. And we went into a second printing, and that sold out almost as fast. And you know, we got a lot of reviews that were favorable. Only in almost, I think there were 1 or 2 non-LGBTQ publications. Mm-hmm. So all of this was happening in the, we didn't call it queer then, but in the queer world.
Right.
And we had a lot of bookstores and we had a lot of publications. So it was, even though there was no internet or cell phones or whatever, people, could know about it and purchase it. And it just was huge.
And you also, didn't you publish some postcard representatives?
Yeah.
You're right. So that people could put them on their refrigerator and then somebody would see, another extension of the word of mouth, I guess, popularizing the book.
Well, my whole mission, as it were, my self-assigned work was to make the images accessible in as many ways as possible to as many lesbians as possible, which is why I put them in the magazines and the newspapers. I made calendars, I made postcards. You could buy them for 25 cents. I didn't want people not to be able to have them because of money or because they couldn't find them. I just wanted, when you come out of a desert and you know what it's like to be thirsty, you just want to make the water available to everybody. Right. And it was really, it's so hard to explain to people now how totally unavailable things were. Mm-hmm. And the desert was real. The image desert was everywhere.
Right. I mean, I'm of that era. I'm a little bit younger than you are, but I was in college in the 70s and struggling with my own identity. And there weren't a lot of role models and sources other than those that tended to make you just feel like you were some kind of weirdo. And so this book, I'm confident, went a long way toward giving people the courage. Yeah, I can live the life I want to live and choose my friends and my lovers, etc. I'm curious what drove you to, like, here it is 40 years later, and why now a reprinting, and what are you learning as a new generation of people are exploring the book?
Well, I was ready for it to be reprinted at any point. And what happened was that the publisher came to me and they felt it was a good time to reissue this book. And they were right, because this book has also sold out its first printing and in no time at all, and is in its second printing. And the difference is that it is reaching so many more people. Mm-hmm. It is not only reaching non-queer people, it is reaching people all over the world. I want to show you one of my favorite things. It's been very widely reviewed, including in Newsweek Japan.
Oh,
and, just to see this, which of course I can't read, but I know it says nice things, really is amazing to me. And I have been getting letters from people in rural Brazil and tiny little towns thanking me, for this book, which somehow they got their hands on. And, I think I'm especially heartened by the reception from younger people, because it speaks to them in all kinds of different ways that I would not have assumed. And it makes me, it just makes me happy.
Well, happy and, and hopeful, that that these lives are celebrated when not so long ago one would face serious legal challenges and undergo the kinds of experiences that you were describing a few minutes ago. I'm curious, now that everyone has a cell phone and they can be a photographer without taking a correspondence class or without learning how to develop in the darkroom, as even I once did, although badly. So does that help also popularize images of queer culture and people who are exploring their identity and coming out and going even further than, you know, lesbians and gays 40 years ago? Do you think the new technology helps make the barriers seem less real and create, again, that sense of community and inclusivity?
I think it's complicated, Diane. I think it's one of those double-edged swords that used to be a lesbian symbol, the labyrinth. But the good part about having, well, let me start with the bad. The problem with a lot of the technology and the culture in terms of photographs is how easy it is to present yourself falsely, and how for young people in particular, you can feel bad about yourself if you don't live up to the kind of imagery that's very available and shows still, just as it was 40 years ago, a bias toward, you know, slim, good-looking, young, blonde,
right,
people, and leaving out so many other kinds of people. And, you know, there are a lot of studies about how young people are messed up by what they see on social media. But the good part is there are some avenues that didn't exist before for the underrepresented parts of the population to put out imagery. But I think, you know, in 40 plus years, we have not advanced nearly far enough in terms of representing the majority of the population, right? I mean, I could give you a list as long as my arm of people you don't see in mainstream media. And I'll just give a few, because obviously you don't see Black, brown, indigenous, and other people of color. You don't see disabled people. You don't see fat people. You don't see immigrant people. You don't see trans people in any proportion to what they are in the population, you know, and that's because structurally mainstream media are still controlled by and large, you know, by rich white men.
Right.
So it's a structural problem. It isn't by mistake that groups get ignored or excluded or erased. Just as it wasn't when lesbians weren't, represented in the 70s. That's not a mistake. That's intentional. It is a way that that disempowers people. Because actually this is interesting. I ran across a study where the researchers were looking at what it meant when you didn't see yourself in the media. And I think we all know that it can make you feel bad about yourself. It makes you feel like you don't exist. You're not important. And it was so bad that they called it symbolic annihilation.
Oh.
They actually called it annihilation. And we know that the suicide rates among young queer people are higher than among other kids. And that is partly because the representation is not good.
Right. I was watching a documentary earlier this week that talked around the same themes of the harmful effects of social media and the amount of time young people, especially really young people, spend on it, and the barrage of images of people who don't look like them, but are somehow representative of successful people who idolize, and how it's resulting not only in suicide, but more self-harm, mental health issues. And we're somehow not paying attention to that. I mean, some scholars and researchers are, and clearly this group of documentarians were trying to, but it's so pervasive and it's so part of our culture that we don't notice the harm it's doing. And I think, which is where I want to kind of segue to libraries and what we can do to remind all of us of the fact that we come in all shapes and sizes and from different backgrounds and experiences, and celebrate the accomplishments of the LGBTQ community, but brown people, Black people, and where your kind of book would fit into that messaging of inclusion and tolerance and acceptance.
Yes, because libraries are a place that give access to everybody. You don't have to have an academic degree. You don't have to have money to buy a book. You can have access to all that's in the library, and that the library has access to by being in a web with other libraries, just by getting a library card.
Right.
And you know, I'm somebody who loves research. I'm somebody who thinks history is important. And so I believe that libraries are an important place in our society and our culture. And I also know that they're a safe place for people to go when they're not safe in their homes. And that's important too.
Yeah. That's absolutely true. I mean, more and more we feel that that's as much a part of our mission to be that safe haven for people who in many cases don't have any other place to go. And that's another sort of forgotten part of our collective story. If you were to do the book today, it's just been reprinted, what, if anything, would you change about it?
Well, I feel bad that I didn't have more fat people in it. And that's not just because I'm fatter than I was then. It's just one of the glaring, you know, things that I think I missed. I would have to think harder about what I would do at this point, because I always wanted to do what other people weren't doing. You know, when we had the big marches for LGBTQ rights in Washington, everybody was always at the front with the lead banner with all the celebrities. And I was always at the back of the march, you know, taking, you know, making, see, I almost said it myself, making the pictures that other people weren't making. So now there are a lot of wonderful photographers who are doing work. And I would just have to think about what I thought I knew that wasn't being done by other people.
And you also had collaborators with this edition as well. And Joan Nessel, Lola Flash, and you also gave a a tribute to T.A. Corinne. Can you just speak
Right.
for a minute about her influence on you?
T had a huge influence on me. She was a dear, dear friend, and she's passed now. But she was also my mentor. And one of the really important things that I learned from her was that I could make a slideshow and travel around the country with a slideshow, and that would allow me, again, to photograph all over the place, but also earn money. I mean, it was one of the ways that I supported myself. T had a slideshow about erotic images throughout the world, and my slideshow was about the history of photography, lesbian photography. It was called The Dyke Show by most people. And I showed it over 80 times. It was like about 2.5 hours long, and everybody wanted it to go on even longer. And I narrated it live. And
gosh.
It kept changing because every place I went, I would do a workshop for photographers, and they would give me images to add to the slideshow. And my current project, the thing I'm working on right now, since the book is finally out, is getting that slideshow digitized, because there's so much interest in it by researchers and curators and just people in general, because it was, anyway, if anybody, has audio remastering skills or slide digitization skills or syncing the slides and the audio skills, please get in touch with me. We're trying to get this done in the best possible way.
Well, that sounds terrific. I did listen to another interview you gave and where you talked about the slideshows, so I'm glad you mentioned them this afternoon. We actually do have some very talented staff who understand a lot about new media and know how to take things from one format to another. So we just might be able to help you out with that.
That would be so great, Diane.
It would be fun, and it would just be terrific. So I want to again thank you, Jeb, for being with us today and telling this important story. This book is absolutely amazing. Let's both show it again, Jeb, because that was an effective thing earlier. And again, it's anthology editions.
Yes.
It is in the Arlington Public Library. I'm sure it's in many, many other libraries. We've already had people checking it out here, so I don't even have to give up my personal copy, but this has been a true delight. We will follow up with you about your very exciting slide project and see how we might be able to help you, and just look forward to another conversation about history and culture and family photographs and everything else. It's just been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, Diane. Thank you so much for inviting me. I really enjoyed it.
Okay, and happy Pride.
Happy Pride.